The rain came down in cold, relentless sheets, turning the Seattle streets into rivers of reflected neon and headlights. Maya Hartwell stood beneath the broken bus shelter, her coat soaked through, her breath forming small clouds in the November air. She clutched a canvas bag containing everything she owned now. 3 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, the divorce papers she couldn't bear to throw away, and a photograph of who she used to be. 3 months ago, she'd had a home, a marriage, a career as a project coordinator at a tech startup that promised equity and belonging. Then Daniel, her husband of 6 years, came home with confession in his eyes and her best friend's perfume on his collar. The divorce was swift and surgical. He kept the condo, his name on the deed. She lost her job 2 weeks later when the startup folded, taking her savings and her severance with it. Now she was 32 years old, standing at a bus stop on Pine Street at 9:30 on a Thursday night, waiting for the 67 that would take her to the shelter on the north end where she'd been sleeping on a cot for the past week. The shelter had rules: no valuables, no complaints, no hope of anything permanent. The rain intensified, and Maya closed her eyes, letting it wash over her face. She wondered if this was rock bottom, or if the earth could still open wider beneath her feet. That's when she heard it, the low, elegant purr of an expensive engine pulling to the curb. She opened her eyes to see a black Mercedes S-Class, sleek and gleaming even in the rain, stopped directly in front of her. The passenger window descended with a whisper of German engineering, and there he was, Ethan Cross. Her breath caught in her throat, a physical thing, sharp and unexpected. 7 years. 7 years since she'd seen that face, since she'd heard that voice, since she'd made the choice that had defined every day that followed. He looked older now, the boyish softness gone from his jaw, replaced by angles and shadows. His dark hair was shorter, professionally cut, but his eyes, those gray eyes that had once looked at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked, those were the same. Maya. He said her name like a prayer and an accusation all at once. She couldn't speak. Her mind was spinning backward through time, to the small college in Oregon where they'd met, to the philosophy classes where they'd debated the nature of consciousness until dawn, to the tiny apartment they'd shared for one perfect summer before everything fell apart. "Get in the car," Ethan said, and it wasn't quite a command, but it wasn't quite a request either. "I'm fine," she managed, her voice rough from disuse and cold. "You're soaked, you're shivering, and unless I'm mistaken, you're waiting for a bus that stopped running this route an hour ago." He leaned across the seat, his hand on the door handle. "Please, Maya, just get in." She looked down the empty street at the digital sign that did indeed read, "Service ended." She looked at her reflection in the car's tinted window, hollow-eyed, defeated, barely recognizable as the girl who once believed she could change the world. "5 minutes," she said, "then I walk." She opened the door and slid into warmth and leather and the faint scent of cedar and something expensive. The door closed behind her with a solid final sound, and suddenly she was enclosed in a space that felt both intimate and vast, both familiar and impossibly foreign. Ethan didn't drive immediately. He just looked at her, really looked at her, and she could see him cataloging every change. The weight she'd lost, the shadows under her eyes, the way her hands trembled even in the warmth of the car. "What happened to you?" he asked softly. "Life," she said. "What happened to you?" "Success, I suppose, though I'm not sure it amounts to the same thing." He pulled away from the curb, driving slowly through the rain-slicked streets. I built the company we used to talk about, Cross Technologies. We develop AI systems for medical diagnostics. We're valued at $3.2 billion. The number was so absurd, so disconnected from her current reality that Maya almost laughed. Congratulations. I'm not telling you to impress you. I'm telling you because I want you to understand that I have resources, considerable resources, and I want to help you. I don't need charity, Ethan. It's not charity. He glanced at her, then back at the road. It's something else entirely. Something I've been thinking about for years. Something I couldn't do with anyone but you. He drove her to a building in the financial district, all glass and steel reaching into the dark sky like a monument to ambition. The underground parking garage was pristine, nearly empty at this hour. He parked in a space marked Reserved E-Cross and led her to a private elevator that required a fingerprint scan. Where are we going? Maya asked, as the elevator rose with silent efficiency. The 42nd floor, my office. We need to talk, and I need you to see something. The elevator opened directly into a corner office that was more like a museum of minimalist design. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Seattle's glittering skyline and the dark waters of Elliott Bay beyond. The furniture was sparse but clearly expensive. A desk of pale wood and steel, a leather sofa, abstract art that probably cost more than Maya had earned in her entire life. But what drew her attention was the vault. It stood against the interior wall, massive and imposing, like something from a heist movie. Brushed steel with an electronic keypad, a biometric scanner, and a wheel that belonged on a ship. Ethan walked to it, pressed his palm to the scanner, entered a code, and turned the wheel. The vault door swung open with a pneumatic hiss, and interior lights flickered on, revealing stacks of bundled currency, neat rows of gold bars, and document boxes that likely contained assets beyond her imagination. This is approximately $40 million in liquid assets, Ethan said, his voice matter-of-fact. It represents about 1% of my personal wealth. I keep it here as a kind of reminder that money is real, tangible, not just numbers on a screen. That it can be held and counted and given away. Maya stared at the contents of the vault, her mind unable to process the sheer magnitude of what she was seeing. Why are you showing me this? Ethan closed the vault, but didn't lock it. He turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw something she'd never seen before. Vulnerability, raw and exposed. Because I want to give it to you, he said. All of it, and more. As much as you need, for as long as you need it. I want to buy you a house. Set up accounts in your name. Ensure you never have to worry about money again. In exchange for what? The words came out harder than she'd intended, sharp with suspicion and old wounds. A family, he said simply. I want you to have a child with me, to marry me, build a life with me, create the family we used to dream about before everything fell apart. The air went out of the room. Maya sat down on the sofa, not because she chose to, but because her legs simply stopped supporting her weight. You're insane, she whispered. Maybe. He sat beside her, not too close, respecting the chasm of years between them. But I've spent 7 years building something from nothing. I've acquired everything the world says should make a person happy, and every night I come home to a penthouse with a view and silence. Perfect, terrible silence. So buy a dog. Adopt. Find someone who actually wants this. I don't want someone. I want you. His voice broke slightly, and she recognized the boy she'd once loved beneath the billionaire he'd become. You were the only person who ever made me believe I could be more than the poor kid from the trailer park. You saw something in me before I saw it in myself. That was a lifetime ago, Ethan. We were kids. We were 25. And you left because you said I was too focused on building a future, not present enough in the moment. You said I was chasing success instead of meaning. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Well, I caught success, and it means nothing without someone to share it with, without purpose beyond profit. Maya's hands were shaking again, but not from cold now. You can't just buy a family like you'd buy a company. I know, that's not what I'm doing. He turned to look at her fully, and in his face she saw something that frightened her more than the vault full of money: honesty, pure and unguarded. I'm offering you security because you need it. But I'm asking for a family because I need it. We'd be helping each other, and maybe, if we're lucky, we'd find what we lost all those years ago. And if we don't, if we discover we're strangers now, then you still get the house, the accounts, everything I promised. I'll put it in writing. No matter what happens between us, you'll never be standing in the rain waiting for a bus that isn't coming. Maya stood and walked to the windows, pressing her palm against the cold glass. Below, the city sprawled in patterns of light and shadow, each pinpoint of illumination representing a life, a story, a series of choices that led to this moment or that one. Why did you really leave me? Ethan asked, coming to stand beside her. I've spent 7 years telling myself it was because of my ambition, my workaholism. But I never really understood it. Maya closed her eyes, remembering that last argument in their cramped Portland apartment, the way the summer heat had made everything feel suffocating and inevitable. Because you loved the idea of the future more than you loved the present, she said quietly. Every conversation was about 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Every moment was preparation for the next moment, and I was drowning in it. I wanted to exist in the now, to find meaning in what we had rather than constantly reaching for what we didn't. And did you find that meaning? She laughed, a sound without humor. I married a man who lived entirely in the present. Daniel didn't plan, didn't worry, didn't obsess about tomorrow. He was spontaneous and carefree and completely present. She opened her eyes, looked out at the lights, and he cheated on me because he couldn't think beyond the immediate gratification of the moment, couldn't consider consequences, couldn't build anything that lasted. I traded one extreme for another, and both left me empty. Maybe the answer isn't choosing an extreme, Ethan said. Maybe it's finding someone who's learned to balance both. And you think you have? Learned that balance? I think I've spent 7 years building an empire and discovering that empires feel like prisons when you're in them alone. I think I've learned that the future I was so obsessed with creating is meaningless if there's no one to share it with. And I think... He paused, choosing his words carefully. I think I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day. Maya felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she blinked them back. She'd cried enough in the past 3 months. She'd cried in the lawyer's office, cried when she handed over her keys, cried in the shelter bathroom where no one could hear her. She was done crying. This is insane, she said again. Probably. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, pressing it into her hand. But I'm not asking for an answer tonight. I'm asking you to think about it. I've written my personal number on the back. Call me when you're ready, whether that's tomorrow or next month or never. He walked to his desk, pulled out a checkbook, who even used checkbooks anymore, and wrote something quickly, tearing off the check and bringing it to her. This is $10,000. It's yours, no strings attached. Get a hotel room tonight. Buy some clothes. Take care of yourself while you think." When she didn't take it immediately, he set it on the arm of the sofa. "Please, Maya, let me do this much at least." She looked at the check, at the neat handwriting that was somehow both familiar and strange, at the amount that represented more money than she'd seen in months. Pride warred with desperation, and desperation won. "1 week," she said, picking up the check. "I'll think about it for 1 week, then I'll call you. That's all I ask." He drove her to the Fairmont Olympic, one of the city's most elegant hotels, and insisted on walking her to the front desk. The night manager didn't blink at her bedraggled appearance. Ethan's presence was currency enough. Within minutes, she had a key card to a corner suite on the 14th floor. In the elevator, as they rose together in silence, Maya finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind since she'd gotten in his car. "How did you find me?" "At that bus stop tonight. Was it coincidence?" Ethan smiled, a sad, small thing. "I've been driving past your old apartment building every Thursday night for 6 months, ever since I learned you'd gotten divorced. I didn't know you'd lost everything, I just hoped I might see you. And tonight, I did. Call it fate. Call it luck. Call it the universe's way of giving us a second chance." The elevator doors opened. Maya stepped out, then turned back to look at him. "Fate doesn't give second chances, Ethan. People do." "Then let me be the person who gives us this one." She walked to her room and locked the door behind her, leaning against it as if holding back the tide of possibility that threatened to sweep her away. The suite was beautiful, all cream and gold, with a view of the city that rivaled Ethan's office. The bed looked impossibly soft, the bathroom stocked with luxuries she'd forgotten existed. She ran a bath, hot enough to turn her skin pink, and sank into it until the water reached her chin. And there, in the warmth and silence and unexpected safety, she finally let herself think about what Ethan was offering. Security, stability, a home, a future, and maybe, just maybe, a love she'd been running from for 7 years. Maya spent 3 days in the hotel room living like a ghost between worlds. She ordered room service, real food, not the watery soup and stale bread from the shelter. She took long showers, used the thick towels, slept in sheets that smelled like lavender and new beginnings. She bought clothes from the boutiques in the lobby, simple things that made her feel human again. Jeans that fit, sweaters that weren't threadbare, a coat that actually kept out the rain. But mostly, she thought about Ethan's offer, turning it over in her mind like a puzzle box with no clear solution. The practical part of her, the part that had been sleeping on a cot and rationing meals, screamed at her to take it, to accept the security, the safety, the promise of never being cold or hungry or afraid again. But the other part, the part that had walked away from him 7 years ago, whispered warnings. What would it mean to build a family on a transaction? To bring a child into the world as part of a business arrangement? Could love grow from such pragmatic soil? On the 4th morning, she called the number on the card. He answered on the first ring. "Maya, I want to see you, but not in your office, not in some place where you have all the power and I have none." "Name the place." "Discovery Park, the Lighthouse Trail, tomorrow at 10. There was a pause, and she could almost hear him smiling. "I remember. That's where we used to go when we needed to think. Some things don't change. And some things do. I'll see you there." She arrived early, standing at the edge of the bluff where land met sea, where the lighthouse stood as a sentinel against the vastness of Puget Sound. The morning was clear, rare for November, and the Olympic mountains rose in the distance like gods sleeping beneath blankets of snow. This was where they'd come during that one perfect summer, escaping the heat of their apartment to walk among the trees and talk about consciousness, existence, the nature of reality. They'd been so young, so certain they could decode the universe if they just thought hard enough. "Still the most beautiful place in Seattle," Ethan said, coming up beside her. He was dressed down today, jeans, a sweater, a jacket that looked expensive but understated. Without the suit, without the office as backdrop, he looked more like the boy she'd loved and less like the billionaire offering her a fortune. "I used to think we came here because it made us feel small," Maya said, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. "Humbled by nature, reminded of our place in the cosmic order. And now? Now I think we came here because it made us feel possible. Like if the world could be this vast and beautiful, then anything could happen. Any future could be real." They walked the trail in silence for a while, boots crunching on gravel, breath visible in the cold air. Other hikers passed them, couples with dogs, families with children bundled in bright jackets, solitary souls seeking peace. Finally, Maya spoke. "I need to understand what you're really asking for. Not the transaction, the reality." Ethan stopped walking, turned to face her. "I'm asking you to move into my home. To let me take care of you while you heal from everything you've been through. To give us time to remember who we were and discover who we've become. And if, only if, we find that connection again, to build a family together, a real family, not a contract. And if we don't find it, if we realize we're too different now, then I still want you to stay. As a friend, as someone I care about, as someone I want to help. The house is enormous. You could have your own wing. We could be roommates who occasionally have dinner together." He smiled slightly. "Though I hope it doesn't come to that. You're still offering everything, even if I can never love you the way you want?" "Yes, because my offer was never conditional on your feelings. It was conditional on my own." Maya looked out at the water, at the ferries crossing like slow-moving clouds, at the distant shore where other lives were being lived, other choices being made. "I don't know if I can have children," she said quietly. "Daniel and I tried for 2 years, every month hoping, every month disappointment. The doctors couldn't find anything wrong, but it never happened. Then we'll try or we won't. We could adopt, we could foster, or we could just be 2 people who choose to build a life together, whatever shape that life takes." He stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "I'm not offering you a contract, Maya. I'm offering you a partnership, a chance to figure out what happiness looks like now that we're different people. You really believe we could find it? After 7 years? After everything? I believe that every person I've met in those 7 years has been a ghost compared to you. I believe that I built an empire to prove I was worthy of someone, and the only someone that ever mattered was you. And I believe—" His voice caught, raw with emotion. "I believe that sometimes the universe does give us second chances, and we're fools if we don't take them." She moved into his home on a gray Saturday morning, her few possessions fitting into 2 suitcases that looked absurdly small in the marble foyer of his Queen Anne mansion. The house was a Victorian masterpiece, restored with painstaking attention to historical detail, but updated with every modern convenience. It was the kind of home that appeared in magazines, that people took tours through but never actually lived in. "This is too much," Maya said, standing in the entrance hall with its sweeping staircase and crystal chandelier. "It's been too much for one person," Ethan agreed. "Maybe it'll be right for 2. He showed her to her room, a suite on the 2nd floor with its own bathroom, a balcony overlooking the garden, and windows that let in the soft morning light. The furniture was antique but comfortable, the colors warm and inviting. "I'm down the hall," he said, pointing. "But this entire floor is quiet, private. I wanted you to have space to think, to be yourself without feeling watched." "Where do you work?" "Third floor. I converted the old servants' quarters into an office. I'm up there most days until 6. He paused at the doorway. "I should tell you, I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Chen. She comes 3 times a week. And a gardener, James, on Saturdays. I wanted you to know there would be others around occasionally." "Do they know? About our arrangement?" "They know you're a dear friend who needed a place to stay. The rest is no one's business but ours." The first week was strange, like learning to live in a museum. Maya wandered the halls, examined the art, real paintings by artists she recognized from textbooks, and explored the library that took up the entire West Wing. Ethan had thousands of books, many of them the philosophy texts they'd once discussed, now leather-bound and pristine. She found their old favorites, Camus, Sartre, Thoreau, Mary Oliver. And she found new ones too, books on consciousness and AI, on the ethics of technology, on the search for meaning in a digital age. He'd kept learning, kept questioning, even while building his empire. They had dinner together each evening, a ritual Ethan insisted on. Nothing formal, usually something Mrs. Chen had prepared or takeout from one of the neighborhood restaurants. They ate in the kitchen, not the grand dining room, sitting at the butcher block island like ordinary people. And they talked. Not about the arrangement, not about the future, but about everything else. Books they'd read, documentaries they'd watched, the strange currents of modern life. Maya told him about her marriage, the slow erosion of trust, the way loneliness could exist even in a shared bed. Ethan told her about the company, the pressures of managing thousands of employees, the loneliness of success. "I thought making it would feel like arriving," he said one night, swirling wine in his glass. "Like reaching a destination. But it's more like standing on a platform, watching trains depart for places you can't go." "Because you built the platform instead of taking the journey?" "Something like that." He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You were always better at the metaphors." "You were always better at the reality." "Was I? I'm not sure anymore. I created algorithms that can detect cancer cells with 98% accuracy. I've saved lives, changed medicine. But I can't figure out how to be happy. That seems like a pretty significant failure of reality." Maya set down her fork. "Happiness isn't something you solve like an equation, Ethan. It's not a problem with a solution." "Then what is it?" "It's a practice, like meditation, or gratitude, or love. You have to do it every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." He was quiet for a long moment. "Will you teach me?" "Teach you what?" "How to practice happiness, how to be present, all the things I was too obsessed with the future to learn." And so she did. Maya started small. Morning walks through the neighborhood before the city fully woke, just the two of them and the early light. She taught him to notice things, the way frost formed patterns on leaves, the architecture of old homes, the singular sound of a particular bird's call. "You're teaching me to see," he said one morning, standing beneath a maple tree that had turned the color of fire. "I'm teaching you to stop," Maya corrected, "to be here, in this moment, instead of already planning the next one." They cooked together on weekends, attempting complicated recipes that sometimes succeeded and sometimes resulted in laughter and takeout. They watched movies, not in his home theater, but on the couch in the library, under blankets, arguing about themes and symbolism the way they used to. And slowly, carefully, They began to remember what it felt like to be them. One evening, about 3 weeks after she'd moved in, Maya found Ethan in the library, sitting in the leather chair by the window, staring out at the garden where rain was turning everything silver. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "My father," he said quietly. "I haven't thought about him in years. But today, I was in a meeting, and someone mentioned trailer parks, and suddenly, I was 8 years old again, watching him drink himself unconscious on our front steps." Maya sat on the ottoman beside his chair. "Tell me." And he did. He told her about growing up in rural Oregon, in a single wide trailer that leaked when it rained. About a father who'd been broken by factory work and bad luck, who'd numbed himself with cheap vodka until there was nothing left but anger and absence. About a mother who'd worked 3 jobs and still couldn't keep them fed. "I swore I'd never be like him," Ethan said. "Never powerless, never poor, never at the mercy of circumstances I couldn't control. So I studied until my eyes bled. I worked until I couldn't feel anything but exhaustion. And I built this." He gestured at the house around them. "To prove I'd escaped." "But you didn't escape," Maya said gently. "You just built a different kind of prison." "I know that now. I think I've known it for a while." He looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw the vulnerability of a child who'd never learned he was allowed to be vulnerable. "You were the only person who ever made me feel like I didn't have to prove anything, like I was enough just as I was. You were. You are. Then why did you leave?" The question hung between them, heavy with years of unasked things. "Because I was afraid," Maya admitted. "Afraid that if you kept running from your past, you'd never stop long enough to build a present. Afraid that I'd become just another thing you were trying to acquire, another box to check on your way to success. Afraid that you'd wake up one day and realize I was holding you back. You never held me back. You were the only thing pulling me forward. I didn't know that then. I was 25 and terrified of being a supporting character in someone else's story of ambition." "And now?" Maya took his hand, feeling how her fingers fit between his like pieces of a puzzle that had been separated and finally reunited. "Now I think we were both running from things we didn't understand. And maybe we needed to run, needed to fail and hurt and lose everything, to finally be ready for this." "For what?" "For something real. Not a fantasy of who we wanted to be, but an acceptance of who we actually are." Ethan stood, drawing her up with him, and for a moment they just stood there in the lamplight, rain pattering against the windows, the house breathing around them like a living thing. "I'm falling in love with you again," he said. "Or maybe I never stopped, and I'm just finally admitting it. Either way, I need you to know. Not because I expect anything, but because it's true, and I'm tired of hiding from truth." Maya felt her heart hammering against her ribs, felt 7 years of walls beginning to crumble. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "Of what?" "Of this. Of trusting again. Of believing that happiness is something I'm allowed to have. Then we'll be terrified together." He lifted his hand to her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. "And we'll practice happiness, one moment at a time, until it starts to feel real." She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, and felt something inside her begin to unfold. Something that had been closed tight since the day she'd signed her divorce papers and realized she'd lost not just a marriage, but her faith in her own judgment. "One moment at a time," she echoed. And in that moment, with rain falling and lamplight warm and Ethan's hand gentle against her face, Maya chose to believe that second chances were real, that broken things could be mended, that love could find you even when you'd stopped looking for it. Winter settled over Seattle like a benediction, bringing with it the kind of cold that clarified everything. Maya woke on Christmas morning to find snow falling softly outside her window, transforming the garden into something from a storybook. She'd been living in Ethan's home for 2 months now, and somewhere along the way, it had stopped feeling like his home and started feeling like theirs. She found him in the kitchen, attempting to make pancakes with the intense concentration he brought to everything. Flour dusted the counter, batter splattered the stove, and the smile on his face when he saw her was bright enough to rival the winter sun breaking through the clouds. "Merry Christmas," he said, gesturing at the chaos around him. "I thought I'd surprise you with breakfast, but I think I've mostly surprised myself with how bad I am at this." "You're burning them," Maya observed, reaching past him to flip a pancake that was decidedly darker than golden brown. "I got distracted thinking about the shape of snowflakes and whether consciousness could exist at the crystalline level." He said it so earnestly that she couldn't help but laugh. Some things never change. Some things shouldn't. They ate the slightly burnt pancakes with butter and maple syrup, sitting at the island while snow continued to fall outside. There were no gifts under a tree. They'd agreed that Christmas would be simple this year, unmarked by commercial obligation. But after breakfast, Ethan handed her a small envelope. "I know we said no gifts," he said quickly, "but this isn't really a gift. It's more of a possibility." Inside was a deed. Maya read it twice, her hands beginning to shake. "You bought me a house." "Not exactly. I bought a property. 5 acres on Vashon Island, with a cabin that needs restoration and a view of the Sound. I thought—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I thought if you wanted to stay with me, it could be an investment. We could work on it together, create something with our hands instead of just our minds. And if you decide you need to leave, it's yours, a place that's entirely your own." Maya stared at the deed, at her name printed in official letters, at the map showing a piece of land that belonged to her and no one else. Security, safety, but also something more, faith that she had a future, whether that future included him or not. "You're giving me an exit strategy," she said quietly. "I'm giving you freedom, the choice to stay or go, because love that traps isn't love at all. It's just another kind of prison." He took her hand across the counter. "I want you to be here because you choose me every day, not because you have nowhere else to go." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the billionaire, past the scared boy from the trailer park, to the man he'd become through trial and failure and the courage to try again. He'd learned what she'd tried to teach him all those years ago, that security wasn't found in controlling the future, but in trusting the present. "I want to see it," she said. "The property. Today." They took the ferry to Vashon Island, standing on the deck despite the cold, watching the city recede behind them while the island grew closer. The Sound was calm today, the water reflecting the pearl-gray sky like a mirror turned to face heaven. The property was accessed by a dirt road that wound through Douglas firs and cedars, the trees so tall they seemed to hold up the clouds. When the cabin came into view, Maya caught her breath. It was small, but perfectly proportioned, built from cedar logs that had weathered to silver. The windows were intact, the roof solid, but the porch sagged and the chimney needed repointing. "It was built in 1947 by a veteran who wanted solitude," Ethan said, as they walked around the structure. "He lived here for 40 years, completely off-grid. The current owner, his grandson, wanted it to go to someone who'd respect what it was." "It's perfect," Maya whispered. They walked to the edge of the property where the land dropped away to reveal a vista of water and sky and the Olympics rising in the distance. In the summer, this would be lush with wildflowers. In the fall, the maples would turn to flame. But now, in the depths of winter, it was stark and honest, a landscape that hid nothing, that offered itself exactly as it was. I could paint here, Maya said suddenly. She hadn't painted since college, hadn't even thought about it in years. But standing here, looking at all this beauty, she felt something awaken inside her, a hunger to create, to translate feeling into form. There's a shed that could be converted to a studio, Ethan said, and the cabin's second bedroom has north-facing light. You've thought about this. I've thought about nothing else for weeks, about what would make you happy, about what would make you want to stay. Maya turned to him, and in his face she saw everything he wasn't saying, hope and fear and a love so deep it had survived 7 years of absence and emerged stronger for the breaking. I want to tell you something, she said, something I haven't told anyone. Okay. When Daniel left, when I lost everything, there was a night in the shelter when I stood in the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize who was looking back. I'd become so small, so defeated, so invisible, and I thought about just disappearing. Not dramatically, not as a statement, just quietly ceasing to exist because existence had become too heavy to carry. Ethan's face went pale, but he didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix it with words. But then I thought about you, Maya continued, about the girl I was when I loved you and how she believed the world was full of meaning and beauty and possibility. And I wondered if she was still in there somewhere, buried under all the disappointment and failure. If maybe she was waiting for a reason to come back. Maya, let me finish. She took his hands in hers. You appeared that night at the bus stop like an answer to a question I hadn't known how to ask. And yes, the money helped, the security helped. But what really saved me was remembering that I was once a person who could stand in front of consciousness and debate its nature. Who could look at the universe and see poetry, who could love someone so completely that walking away from them nearly destroyed her. Tears were sliding down her cheeks now, freezing in the cold air. You didn't just offer me a house, Ethan. You offered me myself. The chance to remember who I was and become who I meant to be, and her voice broke. I love you for that. I love you for the boy you were, and the man you've become, and every mistake and triumph in between. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, as if he could shelter her from every hard thing the world might throw at them. I love you, he said into her hair. I loved you then. I love you now. I'll love you tomorrow and every day after. Not because you need me, but because I need you. Because you make me better. Because with you, the future isn't something to conquer. It's something to build, one moment at a time. They stood there on the edge of the land he'd bought for her, holding each other while snow began to fall again, soft and silent and full of promise. And Maya felt something she hadn't felt in years, the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Let's restore it together, she said. The cabin. Let's make it ours. Ours, Ethan repeated, and the words sounded like a vow, like a beginning, like everything they'd been searching for finally found. Spring arrived with an urgency that surprised them both, as if nature itself was eager to see what they would build. Every weekend they took the ferry to Vashon, armed with tools and optimism and take-out coffee that went cold while they worked. Ethan proved unexpectedly skilled with his hands. Poor kids learn to fix things, he explained, carefully replacing rotted boards on the porch. We couldn't afford to call repairmen. Maya painted the interior walls cream and sage, colors that echoed the forest outside. She set up her studio in the shed, filling it with canvases and the smell of turpentine. The first painting she completed was of Ethan's hands, scarred, capable, gentle. He hung it above the fireplace. "You see me differently than I see myself," he said, studying the painting. "I see you truly," she corrected. In April, on a morning thick with marine fog, Maya woke feeling different. Not sick, exactly, but altered. She'd been tired lately, emotional in ways that felt both familiar and foreign. When she missed her period, she didn't dare hope. The pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines. She sat on the bathroom floor of the Queen Anne house, staring at those lines until they blurred. After years of trying with Daniel, after accepting that motherhood might not be her path, here it was, unexpected, unplanned, perfect. She found Ethan in his office, reviewing code on 3 monitors simultaneously. "I'm pregnant," she said from the doorway. He spun around so fast his chair rolled backward. "What?" 2 months, I think. I took 3 tests, all positive." He crossed the room in 4 strides, dropping to his knees in front of her, his hands on her still flat stomach. "We're having a baby?" "We're having a baby." He pressed his forehead to her abdomen, and she felt his shoulders shake. When he looked up, his face was wet with tears. "I thought this was something I'd buy my way into," he said. "A transaction I could control, but this—" He laughed, a sound of pure joy. "This is grace. This is the universe saying yes." They told no one for weeks, keeping the secret like a precious stone held between them. Maya painted while her body changed, creating canvases full of light and motion. Ethan began leaving work at 5 instead of 8, unwilling to miss a single evening of watching her bloom. "What if I'm terrible at this?" he asked one night, his hand on her growing belly. "At what?" "Being a father. What if I repeat my father's mistakes?" Maya took his face in her hands. "You already love this child more than your father ever loved anyone. That's where you start. Everything else we'll learn together." In June, they married in the Vashon cabin with only James the gardener and Mrs. Chen as witnesses. Maya wore a simple white dress that accommodated her swelling middle. Ethan's vows were brief. "I promise to stay, to be present, to build a life with you, one moment at a time. And I promise," Maya said, "to remind you that you're already enough, that you always were." Their daughter was born on a September morning when the light came through the hospital windows like liquid gold. 7 pounds, 3 ounces of perfect possibility, with Ethan's gray eyes and Maya's determined chin. "Sophia," Maya whispered, holding her for the first time. "It means wisdom." "Wisdom," Ethan repeated, his finger clasped in his daughter's impossibly small hand. "The thing we spent years searching for in books, and here it is, looking at us." They brought her home to the Queen Anne house, but within a month they'd moved permanently to Vashon. The island suited them, quiet enough for thinking, wild enough for dreaming. Maya's studio filled with paintings of new motherhood. Sophia sleeping, Ethan holding her against his chest, the 3 of them becoming a family. Ethan restructured his company, promoting his COO to handle daily operations while he worked remotely 3 days a week. "I built something that can run without me," he told Maya. Turns out that was the point all along, to create something sustainable, not something that consumed me. On Sophia's first birthday, they held a small party in the cabin. Mrs. Chen brought cake, James brought flowers from his own garden, and a handful of friends from the island filled the space with laughter and warmth. After everyone left, after Sophia fell asleep in her crib, Maya and Ethan sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the Sound, painting the water in shades of amber and rose. "Do you remember what you said that night?" Maya asked. "In your office, when you showed me the vault?" "I said a lot of things. You said money was real, tangible, that it could be held and counted and given away." "I did. You were wrong." She turned to look at him. "This is real. Sophia sleeping in there. Your hand in mine. The way the light hits the water at this exact moment and will never hit it quite the same way again. Money was just the bridge that got us here." Ethan smiled, that rare, unguarded smile that still made her heart catch. "I offered you $40 million for a family. And I gave you something priceless, a present moment worth living in. Best deal I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear, one by one, like promises being kept. Inside, their daughter dreamed whatever babies dream. Around them, the forest breathed its ancient rhythms. And between them, love, not bought or bargained for, but built through patience and forgiveness and the courage to try again. "Do you ever miss it?" Ethan asked. "The excitement of the city? The possibilities?" Maya looked at their cabin, at the garden they'd planted, at the studio where she created beauty from memory and hope. She thought about the girl who'd stood at a bus stop in the rain, believing she'd lost everything, not knowing she was about to find it all. "This is possibility," she said simply. "Everything else was just noise." And in the gathering darkness, with the Sound whispering its eternal song and their daughter breathing softly in her sleep, they stayed. Two people who'd found their way back to each other by first finding their way back to themselves. The future they'd once chased had finally caught up with them, and it looked exactly like now.